Hello, I am Jyotika. Welcome to Excelling Psychology. In today's class, I will explain to you how you should be preparing for your MCQs for AP Psychology 2025. Before beginning with the lesson, I want you to know that I have several years of experience as a school teacher for A level psychology and as a private tutor for many courses of psychology. So, if you need tuition for AP psychology or any other psychology course, you can contact me. I have given my email ID and WhatsApp number in the description box and pinned comment below. So, in today's lesson, my full intention is to teach you how to self study or prepare for yourself for the MCQs for AP Psychology. I'm not going to just take a few MCQs and give you the correct answers. I'm going to teach you how to answer those questions. I intend to prepare three lessons for AP Psychology. One is this one, the MCQs. In the next one, I will explain how to answer the AAQs. And in the third one, I will explain how to answer the EBQs. So, in this lesson, the way we are going to prepare is the focus is only on MCQs. We will not be discussing the other two at all. Why I have been requested for this lesson is a lot is because students are very concerned about the changes in the syllabus. Not only has the syllabus changed, more importantly, the paper format has changed. So first, let's just go over a few preliminaries very quickly. In case you don't know at all what to expect in the MCQs in your exam, I'll just give you a little clarity and then we'll start learning the strategy of how to prepare for them. In the latest AP 2025 exam, you're going to be asked 75 MCQs. So total number of MCQs is going to be 75 across topics. And you have 90 minutes to answer them, which means that you have approximately a little more than 1 minute to answer each MCQ. This is not the major concern. The major concern is that the nature of the MCQs has changed. Up till the 2024 exams, it was just that you had to learn what's called vocabulary or terminology of psychology. So you just had to memorize a lot of terms and their definitions, and you were good to go. So they would give you the stem, which would be like a definition, which is this concept which is described in the stem, and you just give the name of the concept. Now the MCQs are reasoning based. What we mean by reasoning based is they give you a scenario which you have to read carefully in the MCQ, and your knowledge of the concept you have to be able to apply to answer the question given in the context of the scenario. So you have to be able to apply your knowledge now onwards, which is a very welcome change. Definitely, when you're learning psychology, it's not to memorize a few definitions. It is to be able to apply your knowledge of human behavior to different scenarios. So it's a very welcome move. It's just that from an exam point of view, students keep telling me they don't have enough material to refer to. Like the older past papers and all have now become irrelevant. So that's why they're concerned on how to prepare. Which source should they refer to? I very, very strongly recommend Professor Meyer's book, the fourth edition book. The fourth edition strictly, not the editions prior to that, because those are no longer relevant. The fourth edition has been made in a way that will help you to answer 2025 exams. Like it's according exactly to the latest syllabus. I know Barron's and Princeton review books are already out, and definitely they are excellent, no question. But why I am totally in favor of the Myers book is because it is organized into modules. Even if you don't intend to learn the content from the Myers book because you might feel it is excessive and you don't have time to learn, you can learn the content from Barron or Princeton review. I prefer Barron's. It's very precise, but for practice sake, for answering the questions, I would still recommend answering from the Myers book because they are organized module wise. So rather than learning the whole unit and then answering the MCQs, it's better to have those bite size modules that you're learning and immediately answering the MCQs following each module so that you know you're on track. It gives you a time to time revision. You know you're going in the right direction. So that's why I recommend Myers. And ultimately, because they have MCQs at the end of every module, you end up getting so much practice because so many questions are there as a result of that. Of course, you must not leave out any practice. So you must practice from Barron's and Princeton also, and any subsequent books that are released now. But I would say give first preference to Myers. From my experience, I would say that. Okay, now in this lesson, to make things more concrete, like I just don't want to talk abstractly, I want you to understand what I'm saying. So, actually, I'm keeping some questions in front of me to demonstrate what strategies you have to use. If you're wondering where the questions are from, they are from this document, which is available on the official AP Psychology website, where they've given you samples of what types of questions will come 2025 onwards. I'm sure most of you already have this document. If you don't, please just go to the AP Psychology website and download it. On page 158 of this document, the MCQs are given, and a few of them I will take up in this lesson. I'm not sure how many I will be able to discuss. As much as time permits me, I will use those many to explain to you how to prepare. So now let's begin with that. In this lesson, I'm working under the assumption that you have learned your concepts already. I'm not going to be teaching you the concepts. For example, the first question relates to behavioral learning theories. So I'm assuming you already know your learning theories. I'm just going to explain to you how to answer the MCQ. So in case you're not able to follow what I'm saying because you don't know the concepts, just take a break from this video, learn the concept from your reference book and then come back to it. The first step, actually needless to say, but still many students, because they become hasty in answering, I need to emphasize on this. Please read the scenario given carefully. That is the key in actually scoring well. What happens is, many students, because they just want to be quick, in their mind only one thing is there, that I have to answer in maximum, I should just take 1 minute. I shouldn't even exceed that because I need time for review later. So let me just be quick about this. What happens is, when you try to be quick without being accurate, you end up making a lot of mistakes. Later, you realize at some point, oh, I must have made a mistake. You come back, you try to rectify it. That is what wastes a lot of time. If you take ample time to read the situation first and then answer, in fact, you're saving time. Okay, so don't be in a haste. Take as much time as it needs to read the question. Trust me, it doesn't take much time. It's just because you're stressing out yourself mentally, it feels as if it's taking a lot of time. Actually, it takes a few seconds to read. Also, just I know it's becoming a little long, but something very important I need to tell you. There is this speed accuracy trade off always. First, you must always aim for accuracy, not for speed. If you're going to be fast without giving the correct answer, what's the point? You're not going to get any marks. So, the initial few days that you're preparing, you only have to try to be correct in answering your MCQs. No matter how long it takes you to answer every MCQ, let it take time, but you be accurate. Once you've become accurate, speed will come automatically. You won't have to put enough effort. You're so practiced, you're so prepared, you are going to be speedy. So stop worrying about time. Stop keeping your focus on time. Keep your focus on how to be accurate in answering. Okay, let's read the first situation. I'll just read it out aloud so you can also understand it with me. Oksana experiences pleasurable feelings when she hugs her mother. Recently, her mother started wearing a new perfume, which Oksana can smell when she hugs her mother. When Oksana is shopping, she smells that new perfume near the counter where it is sold. She immediately feels the same pleasurable feelings as she does when she hugs her mother. In terms of classical conditioning, which of the following is the smell of the new perfume? The alternatives are A. Unconditioned stimulus, B. Conditioned stimulus, C. Positive reinforcement, D. Unconditioned response. Okay, now the strategy, how you should be practicing. It's going to take time, but it's going to be worth it. Initially, if you're going to give this time to answer your MCQs, later you'll be very quick and you don't need to do it till the end. It's just the first few days that you have to follow this strategy. The strategy is take every alternative which is given and write in one sentence why that is the right answer or why that is the wrong answer. Don't just mark the correct answer and move ahead. Even if you know the correct answer and you're very confident about it, still take the time to consider every alternative and write down. Actually, write in a sentence why it is right or wrong. Write the reason for that. I'll explain to you more about this. First, let's actually apply that strategy here, and then I'll explain to you why it helps you. So, the first alternative is unconditioned stimulus. I know that it is the wrong alternative. As I have told you, I'm assuming you already know. So, why it is the wrong alternative, I'm not going to explain to you. But you have to write a sentence like I am writing in your notebook why you think it is the wrong alternative. So, pause this video, take a minute, write down, and then check whether your answer does not have to be exactly like mine, but whether it is close to what I have written. Why the smell of the new perfume is not the unconditioned stimulus is because unconditioned stimulus is that stimulus which gets a natural response, which the person does not have to learn any particular response to. So, either your reasoning will be this: the smell of the perfume does not naturally elicit feelings of pleasure. I think most of you are going to give this reason for why it is not the unconditioned stimulus. Alternatively, you might have given this reasoning, which I'll put now. The smell of the perfume is not the unconditioned stimulus, rather, hugging the mother is the unconditioned stimulus. So, some of you may have been able to identify that actually the unconditioned stimulus is something else. It is hugging the mother, which is the unconditioned stimulus. So, that could be your reason for rejecting the alternative. Or finally, your reason could be that you're drawing an analogy either from the Watson study or Pavlov study. So maybe your reasoning is just as in Pavlov's study, the bell was the conditioned stimulus. Parallelly, in this situation, the smell of the perfume is the conditioned stimulus here. So that is why smell of the perfume is conditioned stimulus. It cannot be unconditioned stimulus because smell of the perfume is parallel to the bell, not to the food in Pavlov's scenario. These are three possible reasons I can think of. You might have another reason for rejecting A which can be as correct. It's just that have a reason and spell out your reason. Make sure you know why you're rejecting that alternative. Pretend as if you need to explain to your teacher or to some examiner why you're rejecting. So she's asking you, why have you rejected this? You have to be able to give a reason for that. And write it that way. Write the sentence that way, that you're explaining to someone why this is not the correct alternative. Just make sure you have a reason. Now, next, in the same way, I want you to explain why you think B is the correct alternative or not. I think B is the correct alternative, but I need to give a reason for it. So, again, pause the video, take a minute, write down your reason, and then match it with mine. I say that it is a conditioned stimulus because the smell of the perfume elicits feelings of pleasure only after it is paired with hugging the mother. As we know, the definition of a conditioned stimulus is that it draws a response only after it is paired with an unconditioned stimulus. So that is the case here with the smell of the perfume. Because it has been paired with hugging the mother, only that's why Oksana is feeling pleasure when she smells the perfume. So that is my reason for saying that B is the correct alternative. Alternatively, you could have other reasons, such as if you're drawing from Pavlov, again, you would say that it matches what the bell was in Pavlov's study. That's why it's the conditioned stimulus. Or you could be thinking of that the smell is drawing the response of pleasure, which is the conditioned response, and that is why it is the conditioned stimulus. Whatever your reason is, make sure you have a reason that is correct. In the same way, even if now you've understood this is the correct answer, you still have to go ahead and you have to write down why C and D are not the correct alternatives. This is the strategy of practicing and gaining accuracy. Very soon, I'll explain to you why you need to put in all this effort, but just do it. Okay, so positive reinforcement. Why is the smell of perfume not positive reinforcement? A very direct response to this will just be because positive reinforcement is not a part of classical conditioning, it's a part of operant conditioning. But I will insist that you go a little deeper into your reasoning. Don't limit yourself to this. Go at a little deeper level of analysis and think about why it cannot be positive reinforcement, even if it's coming from another theory. So it cannot be positive reinforcement because what is positive reinforcement? In that case, it would have to be something that would encourage Oksana to repeat some desirable behavior, which is not the case here. Perfume is not making her repeat or reinforcing some behavior of hers. It is just helping her to remember something from the past and making her feel an emotion, which is a sense of pleasure, nothing more than that. It's not related to trying to encourage some behavior. That is why it is not positive reinforcement. And very quickly, let's rule out D also. Let's consider why D is not the correct answer. Why is it not an unconditioned response? The smell of perfume is triggering a response, which is feelings of pleasure, right? It is something that is triggering a response. It's not a response by itself. So, by itself, it is a stimulus because it's triggering a response, not a response. So, it cannot be any type of response, like let alone being unconditioned response. So, initial few days when you are practicing your MCQs or when you're doing it module wise, say from Myers, you need to put in this effort, this practice. I know you must be thinking, oh, I have a lot of subjects to study and I don't have this much time to actually write down all this. One, in the video, it appears longer than it is because I keep on explaining to you. In actual practice, when you just write down one sentence of reasoning for accepting or rejecting an alternative, it does not take that much time. It's quite fast. Second, it's worth the effort because this is how you're going to build on accuracy. Then only you will be able to gain speed. Now I'll explain to you why this works. No doubt, you could just mark off condition stimulus is correct and move to the next question. But you're not building your reasoning. You're not taking the opportunity to fully use the scenario given and build on your reasoning, which will help you answer other questions as well. Right now, the question which is given, for that, B is the correct answer, condition stimulus. Tomorrow in the paper, they could give you another question, another situation in which UCS could be the correct answer, positive reinforcement could be correct, or UCR could be correct. Think of it as you're using one MCQ situation to prepare for 4 MCQs. Here, when you write why it is not UCS or the other alternatives, you are reinforcing those concepts in your mind. You're revising those concepts as and when you rule them out. You're clarifying them further to yourself. So you're making all those concepts also stronger along with the correct option. So it helps you answer many more MCQs. So you're preparing yourself better. Secondly, if there's the slightest confusion in your mind, why is it not unconditioned stimulus? Why is it conditioned only? you're able to clarify like this. You're able to tell yourself, see, I know why these are two different things. So that really helps you to separate out concepts. Any confusion, any overlap in your mind is rectified. What happens is when you write reasoning like this, you come to know where your weaknesses are. Supposing in the course of writing, you realize, I don't know why this is not a response. I don't know why this is a stimulus. So then you can go back to the textbook and you can revise your definitions. So when you do this practice, you come to know where your strengths are, where your weaknesses are, and that helps you to prepare better for the exam. That is why this practice is very important. So make sure this is how you prepare for your MCQs. The nature of the MCQs 2025 onwards is now such that reasoning is key, like we saw. This is only how you can build on your reasoning. With passive reading of the material, just reading, yeah, I know what is UCS, I know what is CS, you don't develop this type of confidence that you really will be able to apply to any situation. Actually, this practice which you do will give you the edge in the exam. Okay, so continuing with this strategy and this reasoning, in the rest of this lesson, I'll just take a few more questions and we'll keep applying to those questions just to get further examples of how to apply this reasoning. Let's see how many we can do today. Okay, so let's come to the next question. Again, I'll just read it out. Researchers conducted a study with 200 participants who had been diagnosed with schizophrenia and a comparison group of 200 patients who had not been diagnosed with schizophrenia. The researchers found that participants who had been diagnosed had significantly larger ventricles, meaning brain cavities filled with fluid, than the comparison group. Based on this finding, the researchers concluded that enlarged ventricles cause people to develop schizophrenia. Which of the following most accurately describes why this conclusion is flawed? A. The researcher's sample is not large enough to allow researchers to draw any scientific conclusions. B. The researcher's results indicate no correlation between the variables. C. The researcher's conclusion does not adequately account for the role of GABA in developing schizophrenia. D. The researcher's cause and effect conclusions cannot be made because no independent variable was manipulated. Okay, let's do it step by step. Alternative by alternative, we'll keep on considering which is the correct and which is the wrong one. Okay. A. The researcher's sample is not large enough to draw scientific conclusions. Let's consider the sample size again. 200 participants, is it not large enough? As we know, it's a rule of thumb in psychology going by central limit theorem that a sample of 30 or more roughly is considered to be good enough. We are far above the limit of 30 when we have 200 participants. So definitely sample size is not an issue here. So I would say A is not the correct option, but of course, because I'm practicing, I need to write the reason in a sentence. So for A, what I'm going to say is, my reasoning is the sample size is large enough to allow for scientific conclusions. So what statement they have given here is not correct. It's not a small sample such that we can't draw conclusions. In fact, it is large enough to draw enough conclusions. Okay, so that is one. Let's consider the second alternative. The results do not indicate correlation between the variables. Let's consider the scenario again. Did they not find a correlation? We can see. Indeed, they did find a correlation. People with schizophrenia did have significantly larger ventricles than the comparison group. That is clearly given. So even B cannot be the correct alternative. Why I'm ruling out B is because the researchers did find a correlation between the size of the ventricles and diagnosis of schizophrenia. Let's consider the third alternative. The researcher's conclusion does not adequately account for the role of GABA in developing schizophrenia. That is also not correct because they have asked us for a methodological issue. The conclusion is flawed. So that has something to do with methodology. GABA not being explained is not a methodological flaw in the study. It's not that some researchers have done something wrong in carrying out the study. It's just that they've ignored the role of the neurotransmitter. So, yes, it is desirable they should have explained more what is the role of GABA, but that's a theoretical consideration, not a methodological consideration. It cannot explain why the conclusion is wrong. So, again, I would rule out that possibility. GABA not being explored enough is a theoretical issue, not a methodological flaw of the study. Now I know that what is left is D, and that has to be the correct answer. But here, in fact, we get to know more about why this strategy of considering every alternative is important. Because even though I know D is the correct answer, do I know the reason for it? Or is it just because I'm able to eliminate the other options? That's why I'm thinking D is correct. That strategy might work in the short term, but it won't serve me any purpose in the exam. In the exam, I need to know which answer is correct. By fluke or by luck, I'm not going to be able to answer correctly. So definitely I should proceed towards the next question only if I know why D is the correct option. So let's consider why D is correct. That is more important than being able to say that D is correct. D is the correct alternative because, as they are saying here, the researchers' cause and effect conclusions cannot be made because no IV is manipulated. That is very true. When we do a study comparing schizophrenic people versus non schizophrenic people, that is a naturally existing variable. Researchers haven't manipulated people into having schizophrenia or not having it. In the same way, whether they are having GABA in their brain or they are not having it, that is something that researchers haven't manipulated. That is naturally existing. So whether we take it on the surface that they are having schizophrenia or not, or whether we take it a little deeper, GABA is working or not correctly, or the ventricles are large enough or not, the reasoning behind it. Nothing of this is what the researchers have manipulated. It's all naturally existing. And we know that unless in psychology we have manipulated variables, we cannot say that one variable is the cause of the other. The conclusion of the researchers is that enlarged ventricles cause people to develop schizophrenia. How can they say that it's a cause? They haven't manipulated the size of the ventricles. So, how can they say that it is why people develop schizophrenia? So, this is the correct answer. So, we can say since the researchers have not manipulated the size of the ventricles of participants, they cannot conclude that it is the reason for developing schizophrenia. Okay, so that is the reasoning, and that is how we have come to the correct answer for this question. Let's do one more practice. Okay, so let's look at the next situation. They have given some table here. We will keep that table in mind, and let's see the situation given below. 10 primary caregivers of children completed an assessment to determine the degree to which they practice authoritative parenting. The table shows the participants' scores on this assessment. The lowest possible score is 1, meaning the degree of authoritative parenting is low. The highest possible score is 15, meaning the degree of authoritative parenting is high. Based on the table, what is the range of the caregiver's scores? This, I would say, is one of the simplest questions that could come, right? because we just need a calculation of the range, which is very easy to calculate. So before even proceeding with the alternatives, I would suggest that let's do a quick calculation of the range. They've given the table, actually we don't even need to refer to it as of now, because in the text also then they have mentioned that the highest score is 15, and sorry, not the highest possible score. Okay, then we do need to refer to the table, my mistake. They are saying as such the highest possible score was 15, but if we see this table, we can see the highest score is 12. So 12 is the highest score some parent has got, and the least score a parent has got is 4. Now for range, we know we need to just subtract the lowest value from the highest value, meaning that we just need to do 12 minus 4, which is 8. And that gives us the range. So one of the alternatives should be 8, which is the case B. B is 8. Regardless, as I have told you, even if it appears futile to you, don't go by face validity. Do practice ruling out all the alternatives. I'm telling you, trust the process. It is very, very important to score well. So even though you know it is the correct answer, you can mark it and move ahead. Let's very quickly consider alternative by alternative. You won't believe it, because if you know that what is the formula for range, you will feel how can anyone make a mistake on this question. But trust me, there are many students who either out of haste or because of not understanding the question fully make a mistake in these type of questions. So when you do this practice of ruling out the incorrect answers, you kind of reinforce to yourself that okay, this is the mistake I should not make in the paper. For example, if you look at option A, it is 4. 4 is not the range. What is 4? It is the lowest score that some parent has got. Now, right now, because you are in a relaxed frame of mind, you have thought about, you've actually calculated and seen 8 is the range. So you feel, I'm not going to mark 4 in the paper. I'm definitely going to mark the right answer. But you never know. In the paper, when you're stressed out or when you're being very quick, you might end up marking 4. So here, when you write down 4 is incorrect because it's the lowest possible score, it's kind of reminding yourself or reiterating to yourself, read carefully. Don't end up marking just about any answer just because it's somewhat relevant to the situation. So even that can be very helpful. Okay, so why A is not the correct answer? 4 is the lowest possible score, not the range. Why B is the correct answer? 8 is the difference between the highest and the lowest score. Why C is not the correct answer? Like, why is 9 not correct? Simply because when we calculate the range, it does not come to 9. That's all the reason is for 9. 9 is close to the range 8, but is not the exact value of the range. Finally, why is D not the correct answer? Because D, 12 is the highest possible score, not the range. Also, you will realize one thing, as you keep on practicing like this, you'll also get a hang of how they phrase the alternatives, how they try to confuse you, or how they prepare very solid distractors for the answers. So you will become more and more aware of what mistakes you could make. For example, they've purposely included 9 along with 8, so that if you're just thinking coarsely and you're moving ahead, you're just making a rough estimate and going ahead, you become likely to select 9 instead of 8. So you realize what possible mistakes you could be making in the paper, and when you become conscious of them like this, you are less likely to commit them in the actual paper. Okay, we have a bit more of time. Let's look at the next question. Question 4. Dr. Trenton conducted a study to determine whether massed practice or distributed practice produced better academic outcomes. He recruited volunteers from a high school Spanish class and randomly assigned students to learn a list of 100 new vocabulary words for which they were later given a word recall test. Students prepared for the word recall test using either distributed practice by studying for 30 minutes a day the week before the test, or massed practice by intensively studying the night before the test. What was the dependent variable in this research project? More than knowing what massed and distributed practice is, like of course you have to know that, you also have to be able to identify dependent variables. I hope you are seeing how research methods are kind of overarching most of the questions which are there. So, how important research methods, I hope you're noticing that. Again, that's why just passive reading of material is not helpful. Because when you actually do the questions, you realize where the content is being drawn from. What is the most important thing that they need me to know about, which you don't come to know just by reading over the textbook. So, again, too many benefits of practicing past paper questions. Okay, we will follow our usual strategy and mark off why A is not the correct answer to begin with. Okay, I hope you remember what massed practice is. Massed practice is simply trying to cram up material, as we say, like learn everything at the same time. In this study, as you can see, students have not prepared by massed practice. They've not tried to cram up. So definitely that cannot be the dependent variable. But more so, like I told you, it is about research. It's about the dependent variable more than massed or distributed practice. So I would base my reasoning on massed practice is an independent variable here, not a dependent variable. Okay, just to quickly remember what's the difference between independent and dependent variable. Independent is what is manipulated. So when the researcher has told one group to do massed practice, study intensively the night before, is the researcher measuring that? No, the researcher is changing that. The researcher is manipulating it by actively telling the participants to do mass practice. It just cannot be the dependent variable. The same logic applies to the second alternative. One group is told to do distributed practice. They are told to do it by the researcher. So that is also an independent variable because it is also manipulated by the researcher. The third alternative is kind of very obviously not the right answer because it's not a variable at all. Like if you look at high school students, neither are the independent nor the dependent variable. They're the sample of the study. So that is something actually which we will be able to eliminate very quickly. High school students are not variables at all. They are the sample of the study. Okay, then we know we are left again only with D, but we have to know the reasoning, just like we saw in the previous answer. So we can't take it for granted that D is the correct answer. We must be able to justify. Word recall is the dependent variable. Dependent variable of an experiment is any variable which the researcher is measuring and assuming that it will be influenced by the independent variable. It is the effect of a cause. So what we can justify this as is word recall is the correct alternative because it is what the researcher is measuring and what is influenced or impacted by the independent variable of mass versus distributed practice. I would like to reiterate at this point because my video is about strategies. It's not about coming to the right answer. So I am going to repeatedly emphasize even if your reasoning does not match mine, even if it's a little rudimentary compared to what I'm writing, having reasoning is the most important thing. So don't glide over answers unless you reach that stage where you have practiced so much that you don't need to write it anymore. Then perhaps you could just orally keep on giving yourselves reasons. But until then, make sure you're writing down reasons, even if, like I said, they are just rough points. Just make sure you have thinking behind what you're answering. Now they have given some common table which is going to help us answer three subsequent questions. So let's look at that. Dr. Min conducted a study to investigate creativity. Five volunteers were presented with a series of three objects, one at a time. The volunteers asked to generate as many alternative uses for the objects as possible in 5 minutes. The data collected on the number of alternative uses each volunteer generated for each object are displayed in the table. So on the columns, we can see the volunteer's ID, tweezers, eraser, paperclip, that is what alternative uses they thought of, those are given. And in the rows, we have the number of volunteers who gave each alternative. Now let's look at the first question, which is coming from this situation. Which of the following would cognitive psychologists use to describe the response of the volunteer who provided the lowest number of alternative uses for the tweezers? As such, we don't need to relate this to the table, but you can see there is this one volunteer A who has been able to not generate any alternative use for the tweezer. So what could a cognitive psychologist say about that person? Like, it's more about why has this volunteer not been able to generate any alternative use? Again, we have to know the meaning of the concepts. Would we call it achievement? Is it an achievement of the volunteer that they haven't been able to generate alternative uses? No. So definitely we are going to rule that out. What we can say is achievement is mastery of skills through effort. It is not a lack of creativity. Right? So achievement in fact is not about creativity domain at all. It's more about knowledge and problem solving. But even if we take it in the context of creativity, it doesn't have anything to do with not being able to generate alternatives. If at all, an achievement would be to generate alternatives. Can we call it functional fixedness? Yes. The correct alternative is functional fixedness. To remember, functional fixedness is the tendency to get stuck about one possible use, typically the traditional or conventional use of a stimulus, and that is why not be able to think of anything else. Why? Because it is so fixed in the mind that it like kind of precludes the person from being able to think of anything else. So what we can say is this is right because functional fixedness involves getting fixated upon the conventional use of a product and thereby being unable to think of any alternative use. In this example, it most probably the person could only think of plucking hair using tweezers. They couldn't think of anything else because that's the only thing that kept coming to their mind. Could we call it framing? No. Framing, as you've seen, maybe you've seen Kahneman and Tversky's experiments, depending where you're learning from. Framing is about presentation of information. For example, do I present information in terms of losses or gains? It affects decision making, which alternative a person selects, not creativity. Finally, can I consider it to be the sunk cost fallacy? Sunk cost fallacy is just because I've invested something into an alternative, I don't want to withdraw because I feel I have lost that initial investment. So, despite coming to know that the alternative I've selected is wrong, I just keep on investing into it for the fear of losing my initial investment. That's a totally different thing. So, we can say sunk cost fallacy is about being fearful of losing prior investment and thereby being unable to change a decision. So, again, it's about decision making, it isn't about creativity. The next question is also sourcing this table. So, let's see what is the next question. What was the median number of alternative uses generated for the eraser? This is a statistic type of question, descriptive statistics. Again, somewhat like we did for the range, we should just calculate the median first and then we can consider what are the alternatives given. They've asked us the median number of alternatives uses generated for the eraser. So let's focus only on the eraser column. How do we calculate the median for anything? We'll be able to do it mentally. Just because I'm explaining to you, I'll write it on the screen to demonstrate. The first step in calculating the median is always to put the numbers in ascending order. And if the numbers are repeated, we do have to write them as many times as they're repeated. So here it's going to be 3, 3, 6, 8, 12. Thankfully, we have an odd number of total number of items. So that's why we are able to directly select the middle one as being the median. We won't have to take an average of the middle two numbers. Okay. So now, very quickly, just like we've done for the range, we'll be able to rule out the other options given. Why is A not the correct answer? It's the least score. It's not the median. When we were calculating the median, we considered it as the least score. Why is B not the correct answer? It is not even there in the number set. I'm sorry, I forgot to scroll down. Is C the correct answer? Yes. And why is it the correct answer? Because we've actually calculated as the median. So C, 6 is the median because it is the middlemost number when the data set is arranged in order. Why is D not the correct option? Why is 10 not the correct option? Again, it's not even a part of the data set as far as I saw. Yes, it's not even there. Of course, if it was an even number of total numbers, in that case, even 5 or 10 could have been the median because the number does not have to be in the set. But that is the case only if it is an even number of total numbers. When it's odd number, any number which is not in the set cannot be the median. Okay, let's come to the next question, which is again sourcing this table only. Which of the following concepts most directly applies to Dr. Min's research question? Schema, social loafing, divergent thinking, general intelligence. Again, a simple, like straightforward question, but nevertheless, we are having to apply it to the situation. So, I hope what we had seen initially, you're able to see it consistently across this paper. How reasoning based questions are being asked only, scenario based. None of the questions are just vocabulary based. So I hope now you've been able to understand that fully by this point. What is a schema? A schema is a mental framework based on past experiences which helps us to interpret present experiences. So can we say that Dr. Min's research is involving schema? No, it's about creativity. Schemas are in fact being about being not creative, about being conventional. So schemas are mental frameworks that help follow convention. in solving problems. So, in fact, they have nothing to do with creativity. Creativity is a different domain altogether. Can we call it social loafing? Now, again, this is one of those alternatives that you can quickly eliminate. Social loafing has nothing to do with either creativity or problem solving. It's about social interaction. So, social loafing is about, what is it about? Reduced effort in group performance as compared to individual performance. Nothing to do with cognitive psychology, it's to do with social psychology. Is it divergent thinking? Yes, it is divergent thinking. Because what is divergent thinking? Thinking out of the box, thinking differently from the routine. And creativity is all about that. So, divergent thinking is about thinking out of the box, out of conventional thinking. So, in Dr. Min's case, definitely when people are thinking of other things for tweezers, like besides plucking hair, maybe someone thought of tweezers can be used to pick up dust, or they could be used to, the other end of the tweezer could be used to scratch their nose or something, whatever it is, but something different from ordinary. So that's divergent thinking. Finally, can we call it general intelligence? No, because general intelligence is about more academic intelligence rather than creativity. Divergent thinking is best a subset of general intelligence for those theorists who have considered general intelligence very broadly, but it never is analogous to, it's never above general intelligence. Like it's not the superset. So, general intelligence typically refers to conventional academic intelligence, and at best, divergent thinking is assumed to be, or creativity is assumed to be, a subset of general intelligence. So here when participants are thinking about alternative uses, they aren't using their general intelligence. At best, they're using one domain of general intelligence, specifically divergent thinking, which is given as a separate alternative. Or we would say, if we are a little traditional about intelligence, that it's not general intelligence at all. Okay, today time permits me to cover only this much, but I think this much should be enough for you to understand how to answer your MCQs, which was my main focus. So I hope you will keep on practicing this way like we did in the lesson. And if you have any doubts or questions about this video, please leave it in the comments box below. Please contact me only if you need private tuition for psychology on my private number. If you have any suggestions what videos you would like to see ahead, all of that you can comment below. I do read all of your comments. Okay, so thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope to upload the next lesson for AP Psychology very soon. Goodbye.